All right. Hi. Good morning, everybody. So today is the class right before reading week, which means that the next week and a bit are going to be, if you haven't already started, your major development push in terms of like sprinting and getting some playable prototype together. And so before we go in that direction, we make sure to just arm you with what we think you need. So the last time we met, we were talking about UI and UX, to say like as you're developing things, trying to keep your player in mind in terms of the kinds of experiences that you curate and the way you get people to interact with your game. But today is very important for me because what we often find when we see people present after reading week is that there's some groups that have managed to figure out how to work together and how to push a demo out. And then there's some people who kind of had all these various pieces collide together the night before the demo and then, ended up not being able to show very much. So what we need to do is to just give you a little heads up on what to expect and some guidance from someone who has been here before and knows kind of like the process and what kind of things will provide obstacles over the next week and a half. And so for this, I'd like to reintroduce Bryn Davies. He has already come and spoken to us before as our level design talk and given feedback on our level designs during the presentation. But today he's going to be speaking about some of the things you need to keep in mind over the next week and a half as you try to pull a playable prototype together. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to hand things over to Bryn. Bryn, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Steve. And yeah, hey everyone. For those that did not meet me in my previous talk, technical director of level design at Ubisoft Toronto, and I'm going to be talking about making games with other people today. And next slide. Yeah, just generally, you may have seen this already, but I've been at Ubisoft for about 8 years. Prior to that, I was at Lionhead Studios. I made lots of Fable games. Since moving to Ubisoft, I've made Starlink Battle for Atlas, Watch Dogs 2, and Watch Dogs Legion most recently. So some of you obviously might have heard my previous talk. This talk, funnily enough, actually, the start of this one came up, I think just because me and Steve were talking about, was there anything else I wanted to talk about? And this is a complete aside to level design. It touches a lot on my own experiences in the games industry and also part about my own role in Ubisoft. So to kind of get this one started, it's a weird starting point. I have to see if I can grab people on the spot, but I would like to, if I may, find 2 volunteers. It will not be too pressurizing or on the spot. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, and we can do it in the chat as well. As if I can find it, open up the chat again. So has anyone?
Looks like you got 2, Angel and Jackson.
Oh yeah, damn it! How on? Oh, you know what? It's over here, isn't it? Sorry, it's on my share window. There we go. Right. Great. Yeah. So Jackson, I'll start with you. So Jackson, give me an example of a type of game that you like a current, like what are you playing at the moment, or is there a particular game you're like, oh yeah, I love this game. This is the best, or like types of games in general.
I have a. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I would say roguelike or first-person shooter. They're always like, they can't really go wrong with that. For me, at least. Yeah.
Okay. Are you really like roguelikes just as a genre, and you like FPSs? Cool. And I guess so like let's take roguelikes, for instance. What is it specific? Is there something you could put your finger on that you really like about a roguelike? Like what stands out to you as like, hey, this is a thing I really appreciate about a good roguelike?
I liked how fast paced it is, and like just I really like to see how the character grows over time, like how you progressively get stronger and stronger. That kind of makes me feel empowered too. So that makes it really fun.
Cool. Yeah, it's the meta loop, growing in power. Having your player sort of evolve over time. That's the roguelite, isn't it? Where you've got like things that you unlock that you're going as you're going through the game. Great. No, it's super helpful. Also, Jackson, you're I am what are you in the U of T CS class?
CS.
Yeah, you're in CS. Okay, cool. Okay, what about Angel?
Hi. I used to like Final Fantasy because of the graphics, basically. Like the first time I saw the graphics, I thought like they were very like impressive. And I generally just like role-playing games, so I can feel like I'm someone like different in the game world, and being able to like transform into different personas.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I like the Final Fantasy games, especially. I guess the sort of especially on the more recent side, where say sort of PS1 onwards era, like very cinematic, and all this, and obviously as well very dramatic, and a lot of kind of evolving story over the time, and as you say, RPGs allowing you to play different types of people, experiencing a kind of a different narrative and such. And Angel, are you in the CS class as well?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's great. Thanks very much to both of you for that. So, okay, so Angel and Jackson, in this case, you're both on the same class, right? And so you're both doing computer science. You're both writing code and such like that. But you've got, say, differing sort of types of games that you like, different opinions about the things that what it is that drives your motivation to play those types of games. You've got maybe differing views on kind of the player motivations that motivate you, the things that make it important to you about what you like as playing with games. And so these two, these kind of differing sides of opinions on there are things that, were you two to be working together on a same team. This might be, sources of, well, things that, different directions that you might want to take things, because, hey, you're both different people, you're both different types of players. You might also, even though you're both working, you both code, maybe there are different things that you like about coding. Maybe you've got different interests in sort of the specifics around how you utilize programming languages, because there's a whole lot of different programming languages, and there's a whole lot of different ways that you can use even the same language in lots of different ways. And so all of these kind of differences that coalesce around, well, you can get obviously to a point where you have, much bigger teams with much bigger variety of people on them, with different levels of technical expertise, completely different job families, and different sort of spheres that you operate in, different types of domain knowledge, the kind of, and the ideas and the directions and things can all be sort of spiraling off in lots of different directions. And then, this might be a group of 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people trying to all make the same game together. what is that game, and how does everyone sort of keep together and working on the same game, and how do people have a sort of a feeling of authorship that is, hey, this is something that I work on, that I want to be proud on, that I have my own specific sort of needs and desires about. That's a sort of a point of not necessarily conflict, but of friction that can occur between all these different team members. And also when you've got lots of different people on a team, there is inevitably more sort of communication channels that open up between them, right? How do people stay in communication with each other? How do people be made aware of changes? And how do people sort of understand when there are, you know, dependency changes and all that kind of stuff? These are all very big problems. And as you can imagine, when you're on a much larger team, these problems aren't just kind of increase linearly, it's exponential. And it's something that I found really interesting working on very, very big teams, because inevitably from my experience, my role, a lot of it ends up being in supporting particular sort of groups of people on the team, be it, you know, traditionally level designers, but pretty much anyone who builds content in the game, level designers and level artists and such like that. But I also work in between the sort of the content creators who build that stuff, who are in sort of art or design backgrounds, and say the programming teams, the tools teams, trying to work out, you know, how to facilitate things that live in one sphere and get them applied to another. And so I've seen a lot of these problems firsthand. And to me, it feels like the kind of these communication issues and the issues of just how you get people working together on a team are a really big issue, especially for games, particularly with AAA games, because as you see, you know, progressively every year, AAA games are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There's new hardware. It's got to look even better than it did last time. That's going to take longer to produce. It's also going to take more people to produce. More people, more problems, more communication breakdown. So that's why this talk exists. And also, yeah, I should say, especially with AAA development, not just more people, but more specialists. People end up being very, very focused on one area. And so they know that one area absolutely back to front, but also means then that their domain sort of knowledge might be even more focused than you first expect. So I'm going to go over some points that hopefully try and illustrate this problem and things that you can do to improve this, even on your teams that you've got now, and also into, you know, if you end up joining the games industry later, things to keep in mind as you're working with other people. So the first one, which is kind of, it's fairly self-explanatory here. Games development requires structure, and it's the case with any sort of software development that there needs to be some structure in place for your production processes. And I'm sure you've gone over things like this before. Games development is possibly one of the most complicated types of software you can develop. So inevitably, the production process becomes even more specific and kind of important to maintaining cohesion across the team. Now, when I talk about structure, you know, I give like a very, this is the sort of like the easy mode, simple version we've got here. Let's say, you know, this is an absolute ideal sprint. We've got a very clearly defined goal. I'm going to explain that maybe this goal is going to have been fleshed out a bit more. Like we've got actual, you know, we know what we're getting as our first pass of our character, right? I'm going to have a character and he can run about and can do these things. We have some clearly defined fundamentals about this character of what we need to get for the first ever iteration of it. And then we've neatly sort of divided up, okay, well, these are the tasks that we're going to have for each of the different departments. This is how long we know kind of estimates and stuff on there. These kind of tasks as well are things that, hey, we've got a pretty good handle on, you know, like, hey, we've done this before. We know how long it's going to take. Easy peasy, right? Probably not going to be too many problems that come up on this sort of a sprint. And let's say as well, if we've done this before, we've got known dependencies. We know, hey, well, I can't animate the character if the character doesn't exist. So we're going to have the character mesh existing before I can animate it. The programmer can't implement, say, implementing how the animation is going to play on the actual player entity without the animation existing. And so we end up with all these sort of stacked up little individual pieces, but we know what they all are, and we've got a good handle of how long they're going to take. I guess the bigger sort of aspect here, though, is when you have things that aren't as well known, right? So let's say if we're prototyping and we're coming up with sort of blue sky ideas, we've got something where a goal is a lot less tangible. It's still really important to have some degree of structure that might be a very sort of specifically defined production process. It might just be ensuring that you've got a review process in form, right? You want to look at something at X date and you want to see the state of it. You want to see, you know, everyone knows that they're aiming for that date so they can get the work in the right time. And that there's a goal to that process. There's feedback that's going to come back in that you're going to implement for the following review. Maybe you're doing sprints, maybe you've got waterfall. Doesn't really matter about the production process that you're following, the specifics of it. But it just means it's important to use the process to drive the things that are important about what you're doing. So like, if our goals are sort of a lot more fuzzy, we've either got prototype to develop, or let's say we need to refine or iterate on a mechanic, right? Like how well this sprint we're going to have like our second pass on this. We've got the mechanic working. We need to make it like, how do we make it better? How do we make it feel good? How do we make it interesting? The player wants to use it. That could also be, you're responding to player feedback. Maybe you've got a live game and you're doing something in response to, you know, a game that's in players' hands right now. Those are all, you know, goals in which it might not be as easy to narrow down and be specific on. The important part there is to make sure that the goals are very clearly defined. These ones are not so much, right? We've got something fuzzy there. We need to say, actually, right, for this sprint, hey, if we're going to prototype something, well, let's say we've got X prototypes we're going to try and build in this time. And that's, you know, if we don't even know what those are, then our sprint is, well, we're going to come up with some ideas for what we're going to prototype. And we're going to block out some time to do that. And we know we've got a date that we're going to deliver this on. So we get to that date. Here's what we got. If we didn't get anything, well, why didn't we get anything? What didn't work? And how do we use that information to drive change for the next time that we review stuff? There's also a nice point of, for the team, seeing when you kind of get, when you have a sprint review, or, you know, you have just a specific review date, it can give you the effect of seeing progress within the build, which is very important because, you know, people want to know that like stuff is moving forward. And it's surprising because even, you know, as I said, people can be very siloed and be very specialized, looking with the blinkers on, going, I know this part of the game really, really well. And getting a view of actually seeing where it fits into the larger scale is really useful. Seeing how that larger scale has kind of progressed as they've been working on it. So that's always really useful. The there can be a sort of mentality of, well, I did my part, but that doesn't really fly, right? Because everyone's building the same thing. It's very important to see how your piece fits into the grander scale of the actual game itself. So yeah, using some degree of structure, be it specific production processes or reviews, really useful, and make sure that it's something that works for the team. Because if something isn't working, then identify why it's not, and do something about it. Go, this isn't working for these reasons. Some teams don't like working in agile. It doesn't work for them. So try and work out how the process can better work to get everyone working together. The second one, and this is quite a broad point, but communicate effectively. So this can be obviously whether there's a decision that has had to be made on the team about, let's say, a design or a direction change. Maybe something needed to be cut. Maybe something just isn't working and needs to be changed wholesale. At some point, someone needs to communicate that to the rest of the team. And, you know, someone obviously needed to make that decision. That's something to do with, you know, you've got to decide at points who has, you know, sort of control over making some decisions like that. Someone has to have some sort of final say there. But once a decision's been made, you've got to communicate about it. And the way I sort of see it, especially when it comes to decisions that are potentially unpopular or can create friction, is to always share why a decision's being made. And that's, in that respect, it's trusting that the people who are hearing that decision can, you know, you trust them to understand, and you trust them to, you know, kind of get at why we're doing it. There might be reasons like, hey, we don't have enough time to build this anymore. Sorry, like it's not working. It's got to be cut. You might be cutting years of someone's heart and soul being poured into something. That happens, and it's kind of rough, but that's what happens. And so then being able to communicate that and trusting other people's communication, trusting other people to kind of understand, is a big part of doing this. But then there's another aspect to it as well, right? The communicating with people clearly. So I need to communicate something, and let's say it needs to go to people in other departments. Let's say, hey, we're going to change this. There's this gameplay system. It's going to have to change. This impact is going to affect the art department, right? Well, we need to make sure that that communication is in such a way that the art department are going to understand what's the impact to them, how's it going to change what they're going to have to do, and so that they understand it. They understand the why. The why is not just, yeah, well, like this we can't replicate this variable and this thing's going to happen. It's like, no, it's going to be in a form in which they're going to understand that. Another part as well of this is international communication. I'll give you an example on this. This is one I really liked actually from the last project I was on. So Watch Dogs Legion, obviously it was sort of a core development team were in Toronto, but we had co-dev studios around the world. So there's a team in Montreal, a team in Paris, a team in Bucharest. Now, a lot of sort of large portions of the team, English isn't their first language. So, you know, and we're predominantly communicating in English about the project. All kind of internal communication is in English. Even then, it can get really complicated to try and, you know, like games are really, really complicated things, and language can be extremely complicated. One thing that came up, which I found very amusing, was we're replicating London, and there's obviously lots and lots of different assets for covering what, you know, all the different sorts of objects you might find in London. We had a mixture of things like fences and, you know, metal railings and kind of, there'd be railings that you'd have like on a street level, railings that you might have that would stop you on a rooftop from, you know, jumping off there or something like that. Well, we had some issues with railings being like how does railings are different to fences, right? And railings in English are specifically these metal things that kind of stop you from walking through there. But, you know, traditionally like wrought iron, they've got little spiky bits on the top or whatever. Well, we were using this in the asset naming. Railings, I think the sort of direct French translation of railings was actually something functionally different to what we were using railings for. So it caused a lot of confusion initially with trying to get people to understand when we're talking about railings, this is the object that we meant. The direct translation didn't work for a lot of people. Naming convention and stuff like that, it's really important, you know, as you're trying to just communicate amongst people, you know, who already speak English as a first language. When you bring into that mixed translation, things can get really complicated. So next up, there are no stupid questions. This is something that I think is a cultural issue that needs to be fostered a lot, particularly either on your, you know, in your own team, but especially when you get to a much larger company where there are people with all different kinds of skill ranges and different technical abilities and different technical knowledge, domain knowledge and such. As an example, I started in the industry 15 years ago. Prior to my professional experience, I did a lot of modding and stuff like that, you know, building mods, and I built my own games and pass. Now, I knew what a bump map was because bump maps have been around for quite a while. And, you know, I was used to modding games that had bump maps. Do games even have bump maps anymore? I don't think. No one uses bump maps. You know, it's pretty displacement maps now. But yeah, this on the right, normal map. I like, it was kind of new at the time. I know like some places were using normal maps. It was kind of, you know, slightly newer thing to be doing. I didn't know what a normal map was. I was like, what is that weird, colorful image there? Yeah, I had to learn that on the job. Here's a normal map. And of course, it seems silly now. I didn't even know what a normal map was. But that's, you know, like sometimes people aren't going to be exposed to things that, you know, that might seem normal for you to, hey, everyone should know this. That's something where, you know, it's just domain knowledge that I didn't have, and I just learned it there. But you can have other examples where, like, you know, someone pointing out that something's missing or something, you know, that maybe you just haven't noticed about the way that your system works, the way that sort of, you know, workflow works or something like that. One of the classic examples I see there is when you're designing a tool that's supposed to be used by a specific job family. There's things about, you know, if you misinterpret what their sort of normal workflows are, you can really miss some obvious stuff. Or they can see things that you just haven't thought of. You're like, yeah, no, I understand this flow, but you're not, you haven't actually delved into the specific kind of user flow of it, and you missed a step. And it's like, oh yeah, it's really obvious. Like, oh, I have to do this every time. There's an example I really like from when I was working on Fable 3. We had a brand new LD join the team, and like, you know, the rest of I was on level design, the rest of the level designers have been on this engine for years, right? We knew it back to front. And this guy had just come on, he was learning it. He was very sort of fresh on there. He had some other level design experience, but this was kind of his first time using this tool. And we were trying to come up with, like, you know, the tools team had said, right, we're going to be able to fix some things in the editor. What's your worst pain points? And this guy sort of brought up this question. He was like, oh, does everyone else have to do this? And he basically found that this thing that we had become like we'd had Stockholm syndrome about whatever, we just become blind to it, where you open up the property window for an object and you have to widen it by about 30 or 40% every time, because the default is not wide enough to see all the different information in there. It's just, it just wasn't good enough. And like, it's a really simple thing, but every single person on the team was used to doing this. And not just the level designers, like everyone who used the editor. It probably takes you like 5 seconds to do that. It's not a big problem, but that happens 5 seconds every single time someone looks at something in the editor. So it adds up. This could be like hours that you could shave off development time just by making the default of that window 30% bigger. So it was great, and having the ability where someone could feel comfortable about pointing that out was, that's what we wanted, because it was something that just we were blind to, because we were used to seeing it all the time. We'd become so used to doing this. And yeah, also this kind of, I guess, worked hand in hand with reviewing other people's work. You get to catch things that people have become so accustomed to seeing that they're not seeing it. So always having that ability where people can kind of work together like that is really useful. The next point I got is respecting others' expertise. So many icons, horrible bits of software people use. So everyone on a games development team has different types of domain knowledge. Obviously, there's a range of different bits of software that people use. It's probably was like off the top of my head, lots of different bits that people are using, at least on the development team. But outside of even this, you get into even more specific areas, right? Like specific libraries people are used to, specific kind of internal tools and processes, specific programming specialties. You get an AI programmer is very different from an engine programmer. It's very different from like a 3D programmer. Everyone ends up with very, very specific specialized knowledge. And you have to, I guess on the one hand, respect people's specialties, respect the kind of the knowledge that they have in their, their kind of expert field, and then empathize with them as well. Try and put yourself into their shoes and understand what it is. If I do something, how is it going to impact them? You also sort of need to discover like familiar models that allow you to communicate with each other, because say, if you're not used to working as a programmer, but say you're an artist, you're working with a programmer, you might not know if something's difficult to do or easy to do. It might seem easy from your perspective, but maybe you don't have the specific knowledge to understand that actually it's a hard task to deal with. I feel like it's possibly one of the most exciting things in working in games is your exposure to experts from a wide range of different, specialties and fields. Personally, it's one of the things that I absolutely love about my job, because I get to work with lots of different people who kind of have these broad experiences and specialties. I should mention on here, there's one group at least that's probably not as well represented with this sort of spread of software, is test and QC. QC are experts. They do a very specialized job, and the best QC have got sort of in-depth domain knowledge that is invaluable to the development team. And it's a group that you kind of obviously really need to lean on, because they need QC to be able to ship something. But it's always important to sort of keep that in mind, to understand that everyone on your team is an expert. And kind of related to that as well is to always be humble and always be learning, because, referencing the Dunning-Kruger effect, but, there could be a tendency, especially when you don't know a lot about something, to feel like you do, to be like, yeah, that job's easy, it's not hard. but of course it isn't, right? Try to avoid getting sucked into the space where you think that you're an expert on something that you're not. There's almost, chances are you're not an expert at something, and that's okay. Treat everyone in that sort of field and try and sort of, I don't know, get into the mindset of learning from everyone that you can around you who are working in these different domains. Related to that as well is respecting others' time. In production, right? A lot of time you get interdependencies, right? Someone's work may come before yours, or sorry, someone's work may come after yours, I should say. And so understanding where your work gets done and how that impacts someone else is crucial to respecting someone's input on that project. My classic example here is level design traditionally comes before level art, right? You design a level because it's got, a level is, it's part of a game. It's for a game, it's built for mechanics. It has those sort of like gamey qualities to it. It's not like a scene that's just thrown together that looks nice. And so the design aspect kind of comes first before the art aspect does. Not, you don't do all the design and all the art. There is an interplay between, you have the kind of goal that you're reaching together, and inevitably, you've got a tight working relationship there. But the level design sort of block out has to come before level artist comes in and starts refining that down. You need to know that your level worked, then it looks good. And so then the level designer can't just go, oh yeah, well, that's the end of the sprint on Friday, so I got until Friday to do my work, because someone's following on from them. They need to get that same deadline too. So the level designer has to respect that the level artist is coming later. There's so many other interdependencies from here, like, following on from level art, traditionally you get the lighting artist coming in. The lighting artists, if you've got baked lighting in your game, they need to come in right at the end and make sure that the lighting is good, because then there's a baking process that's, who knows, it's going to take like a day to bake the lighting on a, the lighting build farm or something to get in for the build. Well, you can't make any changes after that, otherwise you've broken the lighting, it looks terrible, everyone complains, art director's like, what the hell is this? No one's, this is all rubbish. We got everyone together for this review and now it looks terrible and everyone's frustrated. So these things have got to follow on from that. But then, like, level designer may be dependent on programmers and stuff who are putting together features that they need to use. So all of these little dependencies, this is important to kind of, I guess, on the communication side, keep everyone in the loop. But always think about how your work might impact someone else's, because you're all making the same game together, right? Pick your battles. I was reticent to necessarily use the word battles, but I mean, this is how I usually frame it. But there are a multitude of ways in which you will end up butting heads with someone else, right? It could be in a design decision about how something's going to work. It could be in technical implementation, how different pieces are going to interact. One of the most crucial things I like to come back to is you need to know what decisions are important to you and you feel strongly about, and then ones which are less important, because we all have different domain specializations. We all have different things that we're very focused on in making this game. My example, I have been known to say, I don't care about the art. I don't care how good it looks, right? It just needs to work. Now, I don't say that because I actually don't care about how it looks at the end of the day, but there's someone else whose job really is to make sure it looks great. So I need to make sure that something functions first. And a lot of my focus is on making sure that these pieces function and they work nicely together. this is a common thing that I see, especially with people first entering the games industry. I see it a lot with junior design staff. Actually, you come in and really feel like every single thing has to be exactly as they've specified, because everything's important. It's difficult to kind of draw a line and say this thing isn't as important. So there's always something to keep in mind. I'll give you one example from Watch Dogs Legion. Let's say we've got all these different locations in the world that people have built, and the map team who builds the 3D map that you press start and you open up the map, they're like, we need a way to identify that a location is under the ground, right? It's literally somewhere that's not above ground. It's not a building that's being framed there. It's like a basement or something like that, because they need to represent it differently. How are we going to solve that problem? There's a lot of different ways that we could, right? We could solve it in code on the gameplay side. We could have some sort of process that tries to work out, is this underground? That is quite a complicated process, because being underground isn't necessarily, it's below this Z in the world. It's a lot more complicated than that. And, we get into all these sort of weird edge cases. And then does this thing run at runtime, or do we bake it in? Is there a build process for it? Messy. Similar sort of process for the map team. The map team, well, they could do something that runs offline, but more often than not, their code is at runtime. We don't need to necessarily know at runtime if a location is below the ground or not, because its state doesn't change. If a location is in a basement, it's always in a basement. It doesn't suddenly take off into the sky at some point and fly around. The absolute easiest way of us dealing with this is going, okay, level designers, go in, there's a new flag, ticket, it says this location is underground. Now, that's an easy win there. It's kind of an obvious one where, hey, look, the code to do that would be ridiculous, and the data implementation is very simple. We do have hundreds of LDs who would have to go in and do the same task, and hopefully they would all do it exactly the same, and we'd be able to catch all the bugs and all that kind of stuff. But you can also get the sort of reverse, where it becomes very easy to say, we'll just add something for the level designer or the designer to flag on an object to say, yeah, it's this. And now suddenly you end up with an object that's got 50 different flags on it, any number of different combinations. Maybe some of these combinations don't work. Maybe some of them are complete, terrible bugs. And you're saying, well, the level designer should be able to know what flags to set on this. And you go, the level designer now has hundreds of different systems that they're supposed to visualize in their head and understand all these different flags at the same time. You just open yourself up to, lots and lots of bugs, very difficult to debug and bring cohesion together there. So it is something that you always need to be aware of and sort of pick specifically where a fix might have to land. Everybody makes mistakes. Obviously, it's true. Everyone makes mistakes. It is, you sort of need to normalize when people make mistakes, especially on, if you're working on a big team, especially if you're working in software in the games industry, because, a mistake might cause the build to crash. You might cause, if you work on a team with 1,000 people, you might stop 1,000 people from working today. That's how big mistakes can be. And everyone does them. So let's see, I once, on Fable 2, I ruined the animation director's data drive. I actually nuked his entire depot on there, because I was involved in doing some outsourcing stuff, and I hadn't quite tested my script that I was running, and I just hit go, and it completely, I wiped everything that was on it. It was really bad. It was, I just ruined it, and we had to rebuild this machine the next day. People do that stuff all the time. I mean, I've got some more recent examples I can go through of horrible things I did on Watch Dogs Legion. It happens. And I guess people need to feel comfortable that they can, admit to making a mistake, because hey, the fastest way you can fix a mistake is knowing that it's there and identifying it's happened. And then also, having a kind of culture where that people are comfortable in saying they've done it, and then you get it resolved. And you can also look at like, why did the mistake happen? Like, is it just user error? Someone like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't check this thing. But it could also be like a tool deficiency or a workflow deficiency. Like, hey, maybe someone wasn't even told that this was an issue. Maybe, like, surely someone should be made aware, hey, like, don't, if the game editor can know, hey, you just deleted the spawn point in the level. A level has to have a spawn point, otherwise the game's going to explode. You can't save this level, sorry. That should be something in there. So a lot of the time, user errors come up because there's a tool or workflow deficiency, or someone hasn't been even educated on how a particular system works. That's something to keep in mind too. And lastly, check your biases. Obviously, working in working in the games industry, or particularly in any social environment, right? You gravitate towards people that you get on with, and you make friends and all this kind of stuff. And then, if you're at a game studio, you're still at work, right? You have a job to do, and you're working with everyone. My role, one of the sort of big parts of it, is sort of support for content creators. So I'll support level designers and level artists, lots of people who end up using the tools, who have differing sort of technical abilities, and also do sort of different jobs using all these different tools. And yeah, there are some folks who naturally have kind of gravitated towards and I'm friends with, but I support everyone there. And it's important for me to make sure that, hey, like if there's someone who's just, maybe there's someone on the team who's a bit shy, right? Who isn't as talkative, or isn't, or doesn't necessarily ask questions as much on there, or things like that. Well, my job is still to support that person. And I need to make sure that, hey, like, especially with my role, I got to go out of my way to make sure that they're getting enough support. Because it's very easy to kind of just be in a position where, well, I've got less friction working with these people, and therefore those are the people I inevitably gravitate towards. That way leads to obviously the kind of feelings of favoritism. You end up, doing that. That's never good. And there's a multitude of reasons why there's going to be more, sort of more impediment to people working together more closely, be it, personality wise, and you kind of, friendships and things like that. But also like cultural issues and stuff, as the people who kind of feel more comfortable talking to other people there. It's just something to keep in mind as you work within your groups. That is pretty much it for today. I just thought I'd highlight each of the points here. Does anyone have any questions?
The only thing I would do is just make a little comment to say that this is all stuff that if you don't recognize it now, you will. And sometimes people, they know these things kind of going in, but until you really come up against it, you won't recognize like the importance of kind of being aware of these things and, looking out for them, like just in case there's even like the smallest possibility of some of these things happening. It's always just about being hyper vigilant, but before some of these things turn out to become a bigger issue. Yep. Does anyone have any questions or things that you want to share? Well, I mean, we are at the end of our time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording and then see if there's any other questions that come up after. Before I do, I just wanted to say like a big thank you to you, Bryn, for helping not only share your expertise in level design before, but also just like the realities of what it's like to work with a bunch of people who come from various different areas and perspectives. It's hopeful that people will be able to avoid some of these problems that we have seen in the past. But if you are in a situation, I'm talking to our audience here, if you are in a situation where you feel like there is some suspicion that something might be happening, please let us know. I'm around. Bryn is actually still around. He's kind of been our like industry person in residence for the course, which has been awesome. We've never had sort of like ready access to somebody who's kind of had this perspective. So really, as soon as you start to suspect that something might be going off the rails a little bit, let us know, and we can tell you whether yes, that's the problem, or and if it is, what kind of things you can do to course correct it. But let us know as soon as you start suspecting something's up, because by the time it becomes like a big problem, it's almost always too late for us to meaningfully fix it. With that in mind, thank you so much, Bryn, for spending your time and sharing your expertise with us today. On behalf of everybody in the class, I just wanted to express my gratitude for the things that you do and the things that you've done to help the course.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks so much for having me again, Steve. It's been great.
No problem. All right.